My great pleasure now to introduce Andy Freem to you. Andy and Antonia, his wife, have gained an enviable reputation over the last few years, filming caves in South Wales particularly. And he's developed a deep knowledge and a deep understanding of those caves in that period. Over to Andy.
Well, first of all, I hope you agree that there hasn't been much audience participation so far. So, first of all, Prynhawn Da. That's Croeso I Gymru. Welcome to Wales. Thank you very much for that participation. But the word that you really need to know today is ogof. If you haven't heard that one before, you'll hear a lot of it by the time I've finished. Well, let's start off with where the ogofs are. As John went through earlier on his geology map, these are the main caving areas in South Wales. They stretch almost right across South Wales, 170 kilometres in all. And most of them, but not all, are entirely in Wales. There is one area, the Forest of Dean, which is mostly in England, but I'm pleased to say that Otter Hole, the jewel of the area, is just in Wales. All right, one of the jewels. There's also an area which I knew very little about before I started researching here, Northeast Wales. I know a lot more, and it's a place that I certainly wish to go and visit a lot more as a result of discovering so much for this talk. The area near Clwyd, near the border with England. Well, the talk is about the Golden Age, and it's about the Golden Age of exploration in Wales. And what I've done here is I've graphed the decades against kilometres discovered. And the yellow arrow at the top shows you that we've got this clear period from the 1950s through to the late 1990s, when there was a huge amount of length of cave discovered. You can see since then, it's been quite quiet. There have been caves, and I have to blow our own trumpet here. We've discovered Little Ogof Maros, which is actually going to be a huge cave when we get to the end of it, after 2010s. But really, it's that middle period that I must focus on. However, right at the beginning of last century, a lot of the major sites were starting to be visited. So I'm going to start the story quite early on. In 1912, when Dara Ogof, which means below the cave, was there, and local farmers, not cavers, no knowledge of caving or equipment for caving, went in to find out what this cave was. Few of us now would take a gun and a coracle along on our first caving expeditions, and these guys did. So there's a short video now to illustrate them.
The 1912 exploration by the Morgan brothers deserves our respect. They left several mementos of the event in the cave. The uncertainty about what they might find is indicated by them carrying a revolver, just in case. The cave passage they explored, now the show cave, was very uneven, with sandbanks, deep pools and climbs. The candle illumination must have been barely adequate.
So they got to what is now the end of the show cave and found some deep lakes. And in 1937, there were further explorations, getting another 1.5 kilometres, but they were stopped by some very windy but small tubeways, and more of that later. Then we come to the 1940s. In 1946, there was success for Peter Harvey of South Wales Caving Club, when locals told him of floodwater, which was fountaining out of the ground near a large rising called Fun and Thee. That's the Black Spring. And this powerful draft blasted sand into their faces as they dug. Wouldn't it be great to find those sorts of places now? And they dug into what we now call OFD1. As the discoverers were returning back down the streamway, it was obvious that the news had spread quickly, and local families were wading up the stream to find out what had been discovered. Now, the survey, there's a copy of this survey which is being shown upstairs, but the colours on the survey show the different levels of about 5 kilometres of stream and high-level passages that they found. I mean, so come to this chart. Now, you'll see this chart several times, and I've outlined in yellow the appropriate decade. So we're dealing with the 1950s here. And this is the start of the golden 50 years in many ways. But there was a bit of an overture, because on the last month of 1949, Brian Price found the entrance passages of what would become Ogof Aganathwyth, which is Keyhole Cave. And then in 1957, Hereford Caving Club, on a weekend tourist trip, easily passed quite a large choke, but it was fairly simple, and they got into the main part of Aganathwyth. There weren't that many caves around at that time of that size, just Danrogoff and Aganathwyth, really, and Danrogoff wasn't very easy to get into. So it wasn't a real attraction. And you can see from these images that it was very attractive. There was the queue getting in, but the rest of it's wonderful. Ex-army kit, heavyweight camping, and even an off-road vehicle in the form of a 3-wheeled bubble car. So this was Aganathwyth in about 1959. I've coloured in orange some of the large dry passages. These had floors of cracked mud decorated by gypsum crystals, which you can't see now, unfortunately. And then there was a main streamway with a major tributary called Turkey Passage, and that's shown in blue. And there were big boulder chokes that were obstacles which prevented further exploration. And this is the modern entrance of Aggie, and this is a super quick trip to Sand Caverns. So the second boulder choke has still got its old notice saying boulders are unstable. And then you come to a very slippery main streamway, Silly Walks territory. And you go up Turkey Passage, very rectangular, to Turkey Pool, where Claire falls in because she's got short legs. And then you go into the old passages of the sand caverns, silent, wonderful places, and you can still find good sand deposits which have been untouched up there. 1960s was pivotal. It was an amazing time to be in the Swansea Valley. Existing caves were greatly extended and new ones found, except for the poor old Forester Dean, Paul. Danrogoff, the big breakthrough was Easter 1966. And then Danrogoff 3 was discovered later the same year. There was a lot of publicity, national publicity, and it was conspired that Eileen Davis, who was a young and slim teacher, I think, from Swansea, she was the first person through the long crawl, one of these drafting tubes. That's not the case. It was incorrect. And so this video, it's a very short video, but it tells the correct story.
I was lucky enough to come up to South Wales Caving Club when I was still a medical student in a very exciting time in the late 60s. So I shared a flat with Pete Ogden. Pete had been through the long crawl before the main discovery was made, and he wrote his initials in the sand, but he never got back to explore it as it was flooded for the next X number of months. And then, of course, the big discovery was made, and Pete's discovery as being the first person to get to the long crawl was lost. It was then closed for some time because Cardiff University wanted to study the fauna of Danrogoff, so it was always a little bit, it was somebody else's cave, even though it had been discovered in our backyard. Anyway, we got in, and to actually go in there and in the late 60s, early 70s and see things like flabbergasm, it was just mind-blowing.
It was kept very, very quiet, and we only found out because it was released to the press the difficulty of getting in, because you just could not get in if you were not in the right crowd. We got a trip in, and that was in April of 1967. Of course, we'd heard all about the Green Canal. Very refreshing. The rising and flabbergasting chasm. As we went into the cave, we saw all this wonder for the first time. Being a 19-year-old, going into some fantastic cave like that is a good feeling. Then Edwards, who was quite a ferret, he'd see something, he'd go up it, you know, a bit like a clockwork mouse. You just wind him up and he went. We would have sat on the corner, and the choke was opposite, I seem to recollect. And he looked up, and I'm going to go up there. And we thought, I'm going, and we were all sort of sat around. He climbed up to the top, and he disappeared for a short while, and came back, shouted down, "It goes," or something like that, something corny.
I've caved all over Europe, all over the world, and to me, a trip up to the far north in Danarogov is still one of the finest caving trips anywhere. It's got a bit of everything. You've got the swimming, the crawling, the climbing, and then you've got these amazing, huge passages at the end. It's just such an inspiring, but at the same time, very remote place to be.
Well, on the other side of the valley, just 4 kilometres away, amazing things were being discovered. The sumps at the top end of OFD1 were passed by divers, and they discovered a 4-kilometre magnificent streamway, the long OFD2 streamway. And that's shown, it's not very clear on there, but a little blue line right along the bottom. And if you go up and look at the survey up by the bar, you can see it there. And then in 1967, Paddy O'Reilly and Colin Fairbairn pulled up an inlet, appropriately called Maple Inlet, into the clay series, and the enormities of OFD2, and a little later, OFD3 were revealed. For a while, OFD was the longest cave in the UK, and the biggest chamber was at the top originally. I outlined it in red there, originally a very distant part of this wilderness. The top entrance was then opened up, instantly making it easily accessible. And this wasn't controversial at the time, but it would be now. And it's regretted by some people due to the inevitable loss of remoteness and damage done to those top passages. So here's Paddy O'Reilly, came back from Canada in 2015, and we filmed him in Gnome Passage and in Big Chamber, recounting his memories. So this is quite rare footage.
All these little gnomes, as they were named by Colin, and I think Bruce was on that trip, Bruce Foster. So this became Gnome Passage. Going back to Danarogov, that was the big competition. Come and find something as big and as spectacular as Danarogov. And we said, yeah, we found the big stuff here. And to go up that way. And that's when the big chamber and the entrance potential was discovered. So that's what Susan and I added on as a result. Wow. There it is. The big chamber. I think it still looks exactly the same feeling when we first just walked in here. Susan and I, just the two of us. We felt fairly exposed. We were right out on our own. Nobody knew where we were, and a long way from the Cumbernauld entrance. We said we'd done enough for this trip. I think we sat for about 10 minutes or so, just trying to get a sense of its size and scale and so on. And all we had were carbide lights. This spot is the memorable one for me. All the other stuff, yes, is fantastic, but I always remember being the first person in here, looking at it, realising its scale. When we tried to think of a name for it, the first name that came up was the Vatican. We very quickly nixed that one. We didn't want it to be too Catholic or religious, so it just became the big chamber. And of course, when the entrance was subsequently discovered, and everybody wanted to rename it, we said, no, it's the big chamber, near the entrance. So that name seems to have stuck.
Further west, Mel Davis was systematically exploring the Castle Martin cliffs. In 1962, he found a jewel of a cave, which he called Oggovan. Its entrance is a third of the way down the cliff, directly below this viewpoint. And to get to it, there's a very exposed 20-metre abseil, quite unusual for a caver, into a large portal. And then a crawl winds its way round to a remarkable window, 40 meters above the sea. And this has to be traversed. And then some squeezes and crawls give access to a chamber with amazing formations, reminiscent of a Mediterranean environment. Remember, you're on a sea cliff in West Wales. And, of course, as a result, Ogof Govan massively predates the modern landscape. But, of course, it's now being actively eroded by marine action. So go and see it while you can. 1970s. The pace of discovery in terms of length slowed, but there were some amazing regionally important finds that were made. Otter Hole lies just north of Chepstow. Part of the cave lies underneath Chepstow Racecourse. Apparently you can't hear them thumping along. Of course, all caves are unique, but this one takes uniqueness to another level. The entrance to the cave is located in the trees near the blue arrow, just off the photographs, I think. The point you need to note is that the River Wye is a bit tidal. It's part of the Severn Estuary, which has one of the highest tidal ranges in the world. It's 13-meter tidal range between low and high at Chepstow. That's a lot of meters. And this is where the actual water comes out into the river. It's about a third of the way down from high tide on these very liquidy mud flats. The cave was first entered, I believe, by GSS in 1970, following local advice about what might be a possible site of interest. It's been enlarged, but that's what it looks like now. And after that, a crawl of close to 300 meters was followed until it got to what was described as a brown, disappearing lake. The timing of the next trip in, which was a surveying party, coincided, unfortunately, with the highest tide of the century. This surveying team also made the classic mistake of British summertime mistiming by 1 hour. This was a near fatal error. They were chased back out of the cave by rising chocolate brown water. This is the lake in its passable state. This might be a bit jumpy. Apologies, particularly to Paul.
Yeah, when the water was way, way up.
It would have been about 5 meters underwater, didn't it?
So it's sumped for around 2 hours either side of high tide, and parties normally stay in the cave over the tide to make the most use of the visit. So where the upper rope goes through, it's sumped right up to there. So you're locked in. But after a good wash, it's an amazing place to visit. The passages are exceptionally beautiful, and that's Mark's image. And this was taken from Paul Taylor's Otter Hole film project. This is a long-term project for filming the entire cave. When it comes out, it'll be an amazing film and well worth watching. And now to North Wales. In the 1890s, the miners got fed up with water in their mines, and so they dug the 16-kilometer Miller sea level tunnel. This is it. It dries out their mines. It goes at a gradient of 1 meter per kilometer and takes a huge volume of water out to the coast. A consequence of this was that it dewatered all the natural rivers, and though they didn't know it at the time, the caves underneath as well. And it's still active. The River Allen, near Loggerheads, which I've marked in blue there, is one such river. And in 1973, North Wales Caving Club noticed an odd drafting gravel patch in a dry riverbed. It sounds intriguing. And they started digging, and that led to Ogof Hesbalin. The cave used to be a phreatic route for the river, basically. It's a pirating route underneath, through which the water would be pushed under pressure. It's very muddy, very arduous, and it's now been further explored with as many as 16 pitches and 2 sumps. So it's quite a cave to do. This is a vertical section of the cave, and you can see a blue line there, which is the pre-mining water level and also the flood water level. So The passages follow a series of phreatic loops. It's clearly not a cave to visit on a rainy day. During the summer of '76, back in South Wales Clydach Gorge, Don Parker and team engineered a superb route through chokes to find 14 kilometres of Ogof Crug y Ffynnon. As this survey shows, it's an extensive linear system split by 5 serious chokes. But the passages in between are spectacular in size and beautiful. This is the Promised Land, the photograph at the far northern end. So now on to the 1980s. It's a selection, but here are 2 of its exciting discoveries. Up in North Wales, Ogof Llyn Park and the Mineral Master Cave system, it's the largest find in North Wales. Its exploration has an interesting history. Records show that several hundred meters of this passage were discovered by the miners in the 19th century. And the connection was then lost due to collapse. So over a century later, in 1984, NWCC dug through a choke in Poole Park Mine, remade the connection, and added a further 3.5 kilometers. Since then, sustained digging has aimed to link the 3 main caves and associated mines that make up or give access to that master cave. The most recent success is in 2015. They're all difficult to describe or remember the names of, so they're known by their letters. So the most recent work is to link ODB with PWM. And the connected system is the most extensive in North Wales, and the master cave really doesn't match the quality of those further south in Wales. However, the main discovery in the 1980s was Darren. This is an epic story. I can't tell it in the time available. Read Martin's fascinating book. It's a brilliant book. He's not here, unfortunately. He's here tomorrow, but you can tell him that I've recommended it. Darren was first entered in 1957. Its reputation then was a do-once collector's piece. It was an exhausting 500-meter crawl. Some very awkward squeezes. They're a bit wider nowadays, but they were tight. And just a short section of large fossil passage where you breathed a sigh of relief, and then remember you got to go back through what you've just been through. Got there. Lovely. Clive Gardner found a descent through a choke in '84, dropped into the rest of Darren. It's ridiculous that I'm just having to rush through it like this. And Tony White then did a brave climb, and in one long day, 5 kilometers of new cave in one day is quite epic in Britain. And right the way down to the sumps at the bottom end here. They even passed through the largest known cave passage in the UK, named it the Time Machine. All of one day's discovery. Pretty good, eh? And then, 1986, Martin completed a through trip right under Llangattock Mountain, a personal adventure. And he linked the terminal sump through to Elm Hole in the Clydach Gorge, the longest through trip in the UK at that time. Not one that's frequently done. And so we come to the 1990s. The discovery of wet sink in the Forest of Dean's biggest system is amazing, and I wish I had time for it. But it's somewhat eclipsed by the happenings just 30 kilometers away to the west. The 1990s was the decade of Ogof Draenon, and you could see from the statistics you saw earlier today the significance of that in the growth of length of passage in South Wales. It's It took 4 years of digging. Morgana Club broke through into this massive system in 1994. 20 kilometres of passages were discovered in the first 2 months, and an average of 2.6 kilometres every month for the next 2 years. The system is likely to be over 100 kilometres long. On this composite image, you can see the amazing extent of the cave under the moors of the Blorenge and Gilwan Hill. Even as a straight line distance from north to south, it's 7 kilometres. This is quite amazing for a British system. The Big Bang Pitch was the original entry point out of the loose and constricted entrance series into the start of the huge fossil passages. Chris Howe was there taking these photographs. I think I would love to have been there, and I'm sure many of us would have as well. So much passage was being found and so quickly that there was basically a case of surveying as you went and conservation as you went. The Environment Agency provided reels of red and white tape for conservation work so they could put out pathways. It looks gaudy now, but it's all they had at the time, and it was free. Sometimes teams were laying as they went, exploring long new passages, rolling it out, basically like putting lines down a road, because there was this protection that was seen as essential. So it's not surprising that the discoverers have great affection and feelings and responsibility for managing this cave. And they have concerns that it should be maintained as far as possible in its undamaged condition for future generations to appreciate. So to finish off, I've just got time, I think, a very short video of a journey from the entrance to one of the far reaches called Circus Maximus.
The cool draft of air through a steeply descending succession of loose boulders, wet crawls and squeezes. An awkward rope climb marks the abrupt change into ancient, huge passage.
Tube that we found called Sleep Crawler that eventually, via a series of digs, led into War of the Worlds, and that's how we discovered War of the Worlds. And then about a month later, Gavin Lowe and Steve Roberts and others broke through it at the Last Sandwich, and that's how they found Dollymore. So the two big passages were found within a month or two of each other, I think.
This is the entrance to the dig on the U-bend, which was the breakthrough dig into Dollymore series, because they actually dug through in 6 trips, which is pretty short.
So this was just full of rubble. Wow. Took us 4 or 5 hours to dig out.
Fantastic. It's not that well visited.
What can you see from there, Claire?
Black. We had to work to find the way through, and then popped out into this. Circus Maximus. It's brilliant.
It's almost more amazing for having had to do the hard work.
A few metres of narrow passage allow us to peer into the final fantastical chamber.
Very few caving trips have ever matched this one.
We'll sport and we'll play and delight as the dawn dances over the bay. Sleep blows the breath of the morning away, and we follow the heron home.
Well, I'd like to thank, as always, a fantastic amount of help I've had from photos and videos. If you want to see any of those videos in length, they're on YouTube, Catchpool 1, and they're there for you to enjoy at home at your leisure. Thank you very much.